And so I'm Rebecca Johnson, and I'm saying welcome to all of you, and starting with an apology that it appears that the Eventbrite that was sent out to those of you that registered via the Greenham Women Everywhere website didn't it sent you a reminder, but didn't send you the Zoom link 30 minutes beforehand, which is what should have happened. We'll try and sort that out, but meanwhile, we've had a frantic several minutes of just trying to send the Zoom link directly to as many people as possible. These things happen, and we're still on a learning curve. But I want to just welcome you not only to this, which is the fifth webinar in our series of Greenham 40th online talks under the title of Weaving the Webinars. The previous webinars can be found on the Greenham Women Everywhere website. They were all recorded. Some of you joined them. They were on issues like feminist peace, opposing violence, war, and militarism, and on feminist disarmament, from Greenham to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and two on the Pacific, speaking out against nuclear colonialism, and also having a Pacific fireside catch up while some of us were at Greenham over on this side of the world for the physical activities on the 4th and 5th of September. So we're very, very grateful to Scary Little Girls for providing this space for Greenham Women Everywhere events, and also want to thank the Maypole Fund for supporting our Greenham 40th activities at Greenham and Aldermaston, and including this webinar. Now, we've chosen the webinar format because it's better for kind of safety and security when we're taking on issues that there may be people who want to disrupt or Zoom bomb us. So that's why we're doing it. That means that all of you who are not panelists, you can see us, and you can add comments into the chat, as far as we understand that we've set that up. And Jane and I are being tech support in this one. So if you do have questions, then please put them into the chat. You can also use the Q&A for it, but I think the chat is probably where questions will work best. And if you do want to speak or ask the question, you need to put that in the chat as well, and we can enable some people who are our guests at the moment to be panelists to ask the questions directly. I think that's the main kind of housekeeping. So today's webinar is on Western Shoshone Speak Out Against Nuclear Colonialism. And our keynote speaker is Ian Zabate. We also have here three of the Greenham women, Jane Gregory, Lorna Richardson, and Juley Howard. For those of you that received the Eventbrite invitation, this was described. These are the three who, with a fourth guy called Michael Terry from the American Peace Test, actually walked with the blessing of the Western Shoshone elders across what is known by the US and the British as the Nevada test site, because that is where the UK has conducted conducted 24 nuclear tests since 1958. And in November 1990, we got tipped off about a test being planned for the Trident program, and organized a nonviolent direct action, as I say, with the blessing of the Western Shoshone people. And so we have the three women who took part in that, who are here. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Juley Howard, who has coordinated this webinar and is going to facilitate it, and for her to say a little bit more about the connection between Greenham and the Western Shoshone issues that Ian is going to talk about, and she will also introduce our keynote speaker. Over to you, Juley.
Oh, well, thanks ever so much. Anybody who's been able to get into the meeting, it's good to see that so many people have made it. Sorry for the technical hitches, and I don't know when they'll get resolved, but hopefully soon. So I want, I've lost everybody apart from myself. That's a bit disconcerting. Anyway, so I want to just briefly introduce the meeting, because really it's Ian we're here to listen to tonight. And so my name's Julie. I was one of 3 women from Greenham who went along to the, who took part in the action at the test site. What can I say? I'd read about the Western Shoshone Nation and their campaign and fight, in fact, their action against nuclear weapons missile systems, not just nuclear weapons testing on their land for a number of years, because I'd subscribed to a local anti-nuclear magazine in Nevada somehow. And I was thrilled when Rebecca got in contact with us, completely out of the blue, saying she'd met somebody from Nevada who'd suggested that a British nuclear weapons test, by which may have been a nuclear weapons explosion, a bomb basically being detonated on the Western Shoshone land, was about to take part. And did we want to take part in the action? Well, I hadn't even dreamed about such a possibility of actually going to Nevada and stopping a bomb. I just read about it in this newsletter. And so we, at a very short notice, we went to Nevada. I didn't know much about the situation there, but I was very, very pleased that immediately we found out that we had the support of the Western Shoshone Nation, who gave us permission to go onto the land. They gave us written permission to carry with us in case we were stopped, which we were inevitably. And they gave us their blessing as well. So Bill Rosse, who I've recently discovered was in fact Ian's uncle, the late Bill Rosse, gave us written permission to go onto the land, and Corbyn gave us his physical blessing. So, it's a short story, really. We went through the desert for a few days. Eventually, we got into the ground zero while the countdown was going on, and we managed to stop the bomb very briefly for an hour and a half or so before they cleared us off, drove us away, and detonated the explosion. The following year, the British detonated another bomb, the 24th of the 24 bombs. We didn't know it was going to be the last bomb at that time. And they codenamed that one Bristol. So a couple of us on that demonstration had a connection to Bristol. So it just shows really that they do notice what you're doing, and action that people take has an impact. A couple of years later, we tried to stop nuclear weapons by asking the Queen to stop the nuclear war against the Western Shoshone Nation. We didn't quite meet the Queen. I think she saw us running towards her across the lawn of Buckingham Palace. But again, the Western Shoshone, key, this is their land. They never gave permission for the testing. It's a war against them. And we're very pleased to have Ian Zabati, who, 20, 30 years ago, I knew as somebody who worked at the office in Duckwater, never actually met, but now stands as principal man of the Western bands of the Shoshone Nation of Indians. And we're very, very pleased to have Ian here to speak tonight. I've asked Ian, I was chatting to Ian a few weeks ago about this talk, and Ian talks and I learn more, because it's impossible from the outside to know the full extent of the colonization of Native Americans. Really, you have to be somebody and you need to speak for yourself. So we're pleased that Ian is here to talk tonight. So I'll hand over to him. Just one final thing though, is that we do want to have a chance. There's not as many people are getting through. I can see the numbers going up all the time. So there will be a chance to ask questions at the end. And if you could write your questions either in the Q&As or chats, we'll be reading them out and Ian will be able to answer. He says he'll answer any questions. So thanks very much for coming along, and we'll hand over to Ian.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I became involved in nuclear issues and didn't realize that my whole life has been affected by nuclear issues, even when I was a child. I became involved when I understood my family was dying from the adverse health consequences known to be plausible from exposure to radiation that was in the fallout from nuclear weapons. There are above ground tests and underground tests, and even the underground tests release radioactive fallout because they are vented, and these are deliberate ventings. So in the event, for example, in 1986, the Mighty Oak event, 3 weeks before Chernobyl explosion, there was an accident and a cover-up and a deliberate intent to make it mingle with the Chernobyl radiation, and it was discovered separately, but that wasn't considered an accident by the US Department of Energy because they manually vented that radiation that went around the world and was discovered before the Chernobyl radiation came back to the United States. So, we have to pay attention to these things: above ground, underground, these so-called subcritical weapons tests that are being conducted now. These are tests that use less than the amount of plutonium necessary to achieve and maintain criticality. And these things are going on. One of the most notable ones from 2006 that we stopped was called the Defined Strike event. And that had the potential to resuspend radiation at the test site and send it into significant lengths. We have what are called near downwinders and far downwinders. So a near downwinder would be somebody within 100 miles or so. But as far as a far downwinder, we are all downwinders. The fallout went around the globe. I began investigating the health consequences that my people suffered in about 1992. This is after nearly 6 years of protesting at the Nevada test site to stop nuclear weapons testing. We looked at our food, so diet, mobility, and shelter, what we ate, how much we ate, how we prepared our food, where we went, what we did there, such as gathering food, praying, gathering medicines, and gathering wood to heat our homes, and shelter, where our homes were, what they're made out of, and how secure they were. My community, Duckwater, which is about 300, maybe 150 miles north of the Nevada test site, it's 300 miles north of Las Vegas, was very close. And my grandfather, my mother, my aunts, and my uncles all were there during the period of weapons testing. So we began investigating this from 1951 through 1994, in the period of above ground weapons testing from 1951 through 1962. And it's important to understand that the United States detonated 928 weapons, and 24 were jointly with the UK, and 104 were in the atmosphere. But on average, these tests were taking place every 3 weeks. And it's hard to conceive that fallout was going around the world every 3 weeks on average. And the United States, because they controlled the release of these underground ventings, would wait till the wind was blowing north and east, which is what they call the northeast quadrant of the downwind area. So my community, Duckwater, was, like I said, 150 miles away from the test site, and people in St. George, Utah, were about the same distance and had suffering as well. So when we began to look at this, we realized that it wasn't appropriate to use what the Department of Energy called as a downwinder, which in their offsite radiation exposure review profile, they used what a sheep herder as the person that would be reasonably exposed. And this person was herding sheep, was non-indigenous, was herding sheep, and would get their food from the store and live out on the range for 3 weeks. The United States didn't study the Shoshone. They essentially neglected us and still neglect us, because this was all done, the weapons testing, in secret. The United States came into Shoshone country in 1951. They did not make any claim under the treaty. This was all top secret, and these tests were conducted, and the Nevada test site and the things that they've done there were not well understood. The United States claims they warned everybody and told everybody, but our community, Duckwater, my community, Duckwater, did not have electricity until 1976. We didn't have money for things like a radio or batteries all the time. And the question I have is, what language did the United States tell the Indians, Shoshone Indians, that we were going to be exposed or victims of a US nuclear weapons test? So we didn't have a lot of information. The United States didn't tell us anything. More recently, we're finding documents that relate to human subjects experimentation, more documents related to deliberate exposure to radiation and fallout. And these are the kinds of things that we need to know. In every other part of the world, Chernobyl, Kazakhstan, in Fukushima, there are health registries, there are health monitoring, there are ways to follow individuals. Origin is important. So in the Shoshone case here, we don't have that. We don't have these opportunities to be studied, to be documented, to have our health consequences understood. And again, part of that, the large part of that, is the US culture of secrecy. And that is a serious problem, because if the United States were to investigate Shoshone health, it would be human subjects experimentation. And that is a moral and ethical issue. It is a peremptory norm under international law. We believe that the United States, by conducting these weapons tests in secret, are violating the UN Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide and the US enactments, which is 18 United States Code 1091, genocide, the destruction of a people in whole or in part, or the infliction of conditions intended to bring about the destruction of a people in whole and in, that is the damning part of this whole subject. The United States is conducting these activities, inflicting conditions intended to bring about the destruction of the Shoshone people without our permission, without our consent, and violating international law. Secrecy is the intent, which is requisite in proving a crime of genocide. So I watched my family die. My grandfather, his skin fell off, horrible. You know, people who get cancer, they don't die quickly usually. It's a long, hard suffering. And I've had to watch these things happen to my family. And they kill my family, and they're not going to get away with it. So that is why I do this work. And I've been doing this work since about 1984, when I returned home and saw my family dying. You don't die in one piece, you die in pieces. And that's the hard lesson that we've learned. So that's why I continue to do this work. I continue to work against a nuclear weapons testing for a nuclear-free world. We owe that to the children. And nuclear power, nuclear weapons, nuclear is the most costly way to fail at climate protection. The enduring purpose of nuclear technology is the production of weapons of mass destruction. And what people don't always understand is that every step in the nuclear chain emits CO2. Large open pit uranium mines, thousands of people going to work, big heavy equipment, wrecking the land, chopping it up to produce this uranium. And then the tailings are spread everywhere. These then go to a processing for fuel fabrication, which releases krypton 85, cobalt 60. Even the fissioning inside the reactor releases radioactive carbon 14. These things go everywhere. And we haven't even got to the point of disposal of this high level nuclear waste. In the United States, there are 75 there's about 115 reactors at 75 locations in 30 states. And all of these waste streams would become a river when they approach Shoshone country, because that is the US goal, to make Yucca Mountain the proposed high-level nuclear waste repository under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, as amended in 1987, is Yucca Mountain. That licensing is going on, and the Shoshone are part of those licensing. So far, we've been able to stop the dump because the Treaty of Ruby Valley, which is the agreement and contract that the Shoshone entered into in 1863 with the United States, the treaty's in full force and effect, and it emanates from international law. It is part of the U.S. Constitution, Section 6, Article 6, Section 2. Treaties are supreme because they are intent on maintaining the existence of the parties signatory to those treaties. And we need the United States to engage in its responsibility to protect the Shoshone people. Instead, the United States is inflicting these conditions which are destroying our good health. We are still alive and living on this land, but the United States has propaganda that it continues to push, that we have somehow assimilated, that we have acquiesced to US policy and laws. That's not the case. We have our own laws and our own customs. And in case you haven't heard, recent discoveries in New Mexico show indigenous footprints in the sand, which are carbon dated at 24,000 years old. Our people have a long history on this continent. We understand the land. We have the oldest life in the world here. So when I say, protecting the Shoshone people, our plants, our animals, our water, these things are human. They are alive. I am water, and you are water as well. So that's probably the most important thing. Our trees are water. Our animals are water. Our plants are water. Everything is water. And it's that pure, pristine water that I'm trying to protect. And I hope you work with me to make that happen. So we have the oldest life, the 11,000-year-old Yatumbi. It's a creosote. It's all over the Mojave Desert here, just outside of Las Vegas. Further north, we have the bristlecone pine, single tree, 6,800 years old. Just over the valley outside of Shoshone country in the Miwok territory are the giant redwoods and sequoia. Single largest tree in the world, except for the Pando. These are quaking aspen, and these are in Shoshone country and further into Utah. These are a diploid plant, so you'll see individual white stalks. It's a Pando, but it's all connected underground. We're talking 25 square miles and up to 80,000 years old. It's unknown how old it is. Then we also have the water. The water that's flowing for millions of years, and the pupfish in these springs, Devil's Hole pupfish near Death Valley, where our closest community is to Las Vegas. So I spend a lot of time in Death Valley. We have a healing center in Tecopa, which is where the pure water is. We need that water because of our health. The people have to believe, and we do believe, in that pure water. It's our identity. It's also something that we need to heal ourselves. So that's why the water is important. Corbin Harney founded this healing center in Tecopa, and now I take care of that water with my aunt and with other Timbasha Shoshone, which is our community in Furnace Creek at Death Valley. So that's kind of the lay of the land and why I work on these issues, and I will continue to work on these issues. We're taking stock, though, on our victories. And just like you've stood up and you've walked and you've protected the land, that work is so important. You've come here, you've done it at home, other people throughout the world, normal people like you and I, stopped these things. We stopped the nuclear weapons testing. We put pressure on the United Nations General Assembly in the early 90s. We put pressure on the World Health Organization, and both the General Assembly and the World Health Organization sought of the World Court a a question on the legality on use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. And we had the result in the World Court project, which said that the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is illegal under international law. That later has now resulted in the Treaty on the Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, January 22nd, 2021 of this year. These are our victories. We've done that. We also stopped the Yucca Mountain proposed high-level nuclear waste repository here in Shoshone country because of the Treaty of Ruby Valley. The United States spent $15 billion and never thought they didn't own the site, which is a requirement under the United States Code of Federal Regulations, 10 CFR 60.121, ownership, free from significant encumbrances. Because the United States came into Shoshone country in secret, they never considered that they did not own this property after being there for 60, 70 years. And we proved that they don't own the proposed high-level nuclear waste repository, but they spent $15 billion. Just a sense, that's $1 million times 15,000. They spent that money. We didn't get anything for it. Nevada got the money. The Nevada test site continues to operate in violation of the Treaty of Ruby Valley without the consent of the Shoshone, and we are continuing to bear the burden of risk from all the nuclear weapons testing, and as well, the United States expects us to bear the burden of its high-level nuclear waste, which we don't consent to, and we enforce the treaty to prevent that from happening. As well, 2 months ago, Nevada decided that they're going to benefit from plutonium that the Department of Energy secretly shipped from Savannah, Georgia, into Shoshone country at the Nevada test site. And Nevada is benefiting from that. They're also part of the problem and inflicting these conditions upon the Shoshone. So other Americans are putting Shoshone at risk, and we're trying to solve these problems. I'd love to do just research, but I have to go out there and be involved in this nuclear waste issue for the last 11 years. Actually, it's been 30 years. 1986 is when I first began involvement there. But like I said, nuclear weapons are the most important existential threat, in my opinion, that we all face daily. This thing is going on. The enduring purpose of nuclear weapons to produce these weapons of mass destruction is continuing. Other countries, the United Arab Emirates, 6,500 megawatts of nuclear power, nuclear energy they want to produce, when they can produce solar and use what is called liquid air. Just outside of Las Vegas, they're building these liquid air batteries. And what it does is take hydrogen, supercools it in a tower, and puts it in a tank, liquid, 180 degrees Celsius. When it's needed at night, it spits out and turns to turbines, electricity. Then there's the organic batteries. These are house-size batteries that are electrolyte, which is organic. It's not toxic. There are options to store safely the energy produced. Here in the United States, though, you hear these conservatives talking about when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you don't have any electricity. And that's a lie, because we have ways to store that electricity. And the difference between nuclear and these renewables is that nuclear can be catastrophic. I think we're all understanding that. It's the most costly way to boil water. It's the most costly way to fail at climate protection. But they're propping up this nuclear industry because they want jobs. These reactors are closing and they're running the wheels off these reactors. It's boiling water. Solar and these other technologies will take advantage of our technology to produce the increases in our Moore's law to increase the benefits. Whereas there's only so many ways you can boil water. So I don't know how long I've been talking, but I just wanted to maybe take a break for a second, see if there's more direction you'd like me to head in.
Yeah, I can talk and I can see myself on the screen. Yeah, so Ian, when we were talking earlier, a couple of weeks ago, it really made me think it's really useful for people to so the Western Shoshone land, it covers most of the state of Nevada, doesn't it? Sort of goes up into Idaho and maybe crosses the border into California, I think round by sort of Death Valley, Timbisha. And the other day we were talking about, it never occurred to me before, why did the immigrants going to the West Coast and the gold rush really need to travel through Western Shoshone land? I've always thought, why didn't they go around? And you were explaining a bit about that and the routes that were taken beforehand, which which is what led to the Treaty of Ruby Valley in the first place, isn't it, really?
Yes, the Shoshone people made this great nation and have entered into formal relations with the United States in 1863 by treaty. The Shoshone Nation have 6 treaties with the United States, and all of them took place in 1863. And here's a map which shows the area. Now, down here, this is the map that went back with the treaties to Washington. And here are the Eastern Shoshone, Northern Shoshone Bannocks, Goshute, and Western Shoshone. But this part of the map, I'll send you this map as well. It says unexplored, and that's the map that went back with the treaty. The United States didn't know where they were, so they never considered the actual location of where the Shoshone are, and we still exist, and we know how to take care of the land. And I think that's an important difference between us and other Americans. We know what we're fighting for. We know what we're trying to protect. It's the pure water. It's the oldest life on the planet. It's the unique. We have as much biodiversity as the rainforest. We have bears and lions and lizards and snakes and rare butterflies and plants. This is very important. The water, isolated species of fish. It is beautiful, but most people come to the desert and they don't see anything out here. They don't see anything out here. And for our people, the desert is an ocean and our life is underground. We have, running by the proposed nuclear waste repository and by the western boundary of the Nevada test site, 185-mile underground river. And that's what's important, protecting this water that ends up going to our healing center at Tacopa, Puaba, that's Puaba, which means doctor water or power water. And it takes a turn down into Death Valley. The healing center is right on the edge of Death Valley. And it goes to, the water is going to go down to our community. So we're trying to protect the water, which will be a transport to our healing center. So in 1857, gold was taken from the Comstock, which is near Reno, and taken down to San Francisco, put on steamships. It went down to Panama, over the Panama Railroad, and put on steamships again to take it to the Treasury of the United States. In 1850, September, one of those gold ships went down off the coast of South Carolina, and 21 tons of gold bullion. And that was the first American major stock market crash. The authorities in Washington needed an overland route. So they began to think about railroads and overland routes. In 1860 was the Civil War began, and those authorities sought even more that overland route. So they came in 1863 and negotiated treaties with the Shoshone. We allied ourselves with the United States to help allow for the transport of gold across our country, to finance, to allow the United States, the North, to finance the war against the South. And they did, and we won. Nevada was birthed in the blanket provided by the Shoshone. And Nevada bears the tagline, "All for our country." That is something that they take from the Shoshone and provide to the United States. But that's the basis for the signing of the treaty. And Ulysses S. Grant, President Ulysses S. Grant, the war general in the Civil War, signed and ratified the Treaty of Ruby Valley in 1869. So that's kind of the history of how the treaty was entered into. And the United States never considered that they didn't own this vast country. We have about 4 million acres in California, 2 million acres in Idaho up to the Snake River, another, I think, 1.5 million acres in Utah, and about 26 million acres in Nevada. Now, it's important to point out, I use those names, California, Idaho, Nevada, and Utah, for reference, not because it is actually part of those lands, because the federal statute, which created Utah, Idaho, Nevada, and even the state of California, Article 11 of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the United States solemnly agrees not to make Indians homeless. So our lands in California are not part of California. But the other laws, as again, I stated, Nevada, the federal statute that created Idaho, Nevada, and Utah specifically state no portion of Indian country will be included into the boundaries or jurisdiction of any stated territory, so long as such remains the same by treaty and without the consent of the Indians. So we don't consent to the inclusion of our property into the boundaries of the United States. We do not consent to being victims of US nuclear weapons testing. We don't consent to involuntarily being exposed and experimented upon with nuclear radiation. These are things that the United States has done to us, and we're looking at ways to address these. As I mentioned, we looked at our health, we looked at our plants, we looked at our foods, and we found that based on lifestyle alone, our risk of exposure is significantly greater than the sheep herder that the United States used in the offsite radiation exposure review profile. They did not study us. They studied another American because they could not study us. That would be a crime of the magnitude of what happened in China or what happened in Mengele's experimentation. And what we are experiencing, we're not getting any help from the United States. The United States didn't begin keeping records of Shoshone Indians until after 1968. We're on our own, and we need to continue to look at these things. The United States is bringing more Americans to our country, and these are masking the exposures because it's just looking like, an aggregate. And what we need to do is study and follow individuals. And more of my life, we always had horses growing up, always had horses. In 1971, the United States Congress, thousands of miles away from here, defined our Indian horses, our Indian ponies, as wild horses. And then other Americans came out here, the Bureau of Land Management, the other BLM, and told us we were trespassing and violating the Wild Horse and Burro Act, and that our cattle and our horses, our livestock, were destroying the land. They blamed us for the destruction of the land that was caused by US nuclear weapons testing fallout. They stole our economy, they stole our livestock, and we had nothing. We didn't even have electricity in the 70s, as I said. We got electricity in 1976, and then we could have indoor plumbing. It's hard, and always to be discriminated against by other Americans. They've done this to us. Here in Las Vegas, I was living in Duckwater, as I mentioned, 150 miles north of the Nevada test site, 300 miles from Las Vegas. And in 1991, I was indicted by a federal grand jury. The racist US attorney here got 16 people. At that time, 6,000 people a month were moving to Las Vegas. 6,000 people for 30 years. There's now 2 million people here. It's a desert. There's nothing produced here. They moved here and they got 16 people to indict me for rounding up our horses to protect the range, to protect our land. and they discriminate against us. We were acquitted after 19 months for rounding up our own livestock. They stole my chief's livestock. Carrie Dan, who you may be familiar with, these are my elders. She had a mentally and physically deformed boy who's also passed, and she's deceased now. But all of her life, having to suffer the abuses of the United States government, as if we are somehow responsible for destroying the land. Some of the tests where you came, some of the protests where you came and others had participated. We had at one time 30,000 people outside the gates of the Nevada test site. We issued thousands, tens of thousands of permits, upwards of 40,000 permits to come and gather on Shoshone country and to be part of those. The media here, Las Vegas was making $2 billion in spinoff from the nuclear weapons test in the 80s. So the media here in Las Vegas, when they went out to the Nevada test site, they only presented the case of the US Department of Energy. And that case was that they were very concerned that the protesters, the many protesters, were destroying the delicate flora and fauna. That's what the Las Vegas news media put out there while they're detonating nuclear weapons and in secret, putting fallout around the world and killing the future of the Shoshone people, as well as other downwinders.
It's called gaslighting, isn't it? It's like an abusive husband beating his wife and saying it's her fault. It's just like blaming the victim. I mean, I don't see you as victims because you've been so successful and you're still there, but you have been victimized by the US. I mean, it's just an outrageous slur, isn't it? And particularly against people like the Dan sisters, who were like well known for their commitment to the environment, and living in balance with nature. And it's just an insult to. It's just the worst thing you can say, really, isn't it? It's a bit like saying, environmentalists don't care about the environment because blah blah blah. But the Western Shoshone, you've described how, because of the traditional life in balance with nature and gathering pine nuts and living off the land, has put you in greater danger from nuclear weapons than somebody living in a house, perhaps, and not living off vegetables they've grown themselves. That's what the equivalent would be here. So the Treaty of Ruby Valley was valid in law to stop Yucca Mountain the first time round. You said they spent $15 billion US without even considering that the US government didn't own the land. So could you explain how it is that they think they're going to get a nuclear waste repository there this time round? They still don't own the land.
Right, they still don't own the land. And most Americans or people involved in the nuclear industry believe that it's over and it's finished, but it's an ongoing concern. The United States continues to operate as though someday they will get the repository, but it is a violation of law. So just to go back a little bit, and I'll get back to the repository. When this continent was found, European powers decided not to go to war, coming out of the Dark Ages, decided not to go to war against each other and used an instrument called the treaty, which treaties emanate from international law. And the purpose is to preserve the existence of the party signatory to those. So when European powers entered into those treaties with indigenous people, they recognized the capacity of the indigenous people to enter into those formal relations. And the UN did a study, Dr. Alfonso Martinez, I believe, in 2001, UN study on treaties and other constructive agreements with indigenous peoples. And we participated in that. And at point 110, the Shoshone case was discussed, and that's essentially what it said. The United States and other foreign countries sought to make legitimate their access and rights in those lands. And in the Shoshone case with the treaty, that is the fact. We have a contract with the United States. The United States has obligations. And so we seek from the United States to have our Article 6 treaty reservation set aside by the President of the United States. And I write letters to the President of the United States, Joe Biden currently, in case anybody wants to know. We have people running for Senate and Congress and governor in these areas that will not acknowledge who the president is. And in World War II, if you didn't know who the prime minister was, or if you didn't know who the president of the United States was, and you were in an American or British uniform, you would be shot as a spy. And I think that's a good thing to remember with these Americans who cannot acknowledge who the president is. So I write letters to the president because he has an obligation to act and enforce the treaty for the benefit of the Shoshone and create our treaty reservation. The United States, however, short of doing that, cannot prove ownership to the proposed repository. That is Shoshone property. Now, there's some of the propaganda that is out there that Indians can't own property, and that is propaganda. It's false. Property is not a thing. It is a relationship between people with regard to things. So our contract, being the Treaty of Ruby Valley with the United States, largely speaks to specific interests that were granted by the Shoshone to the United States. That's another propaganda point, that somehow the treaties gave something to the Shoshone. The treaty never gave anything to the Shoshone that we didn't already possess. The United States sought, it's a purchase agreement, sought specific rights in the treaty and agreed to pay Shoshone for those rights that they sought. Didn't convey, didn't extinguish title. We still own that land, and we do own property, and nothing has changed in the treaty.
Mm.
So Yucca Mountain.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So Yucca Mountain, it seems to me like the US needs somewhere to put their nuclear waste, like all government, and it's a government matter because it's such a dangerous thing. Governments have to be involved. You can't leave it to the private companies to sort out, one would hope. But so they're acting like they've got a nuclear waste repository, a big one, and they haven't. So they expect to get hold of Yucca Mountain.
Yes, and so actually that last point you made, last week, seven days ago, the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission issued a license to a private company, Waste Control Specialists, which is a partnership between Orano, I think a French company, that is involved in mining, reprocessing, transportation, and storage of nuclear waste, to store 5,000 metric tons of commercial nuclear waste in Texas, based upon the assumption of a final repository at Yucca Mountain. And as you pointed out, there's nothing happening at Yucca Mountain. It's illegal, it's unconstitutional, it's not happening, it's not going to happen. The United States can't meet the regulatory guidelines, but the license was issued. And under the current Nuclear Waste Policy Act, that license is illegal. They cannot cite an interim storage facility without first having a geologic repository in place. So that is how things are happening in the United States. It's lawless.
Mm. I think I could carry on quizzing Ian on various things to do with the Western Shoshone and nuclear weapons and nuclear waste, but we've got Ian's attention for about another half an hour or so. If anybody's got any questions they want to ask, you can type them in the if you type them in the chat or the questions and answers, we'd be very, very interested to ask Ian anything you'd like to ask him. So while we're waiting for that, so Ian, I feel like it seems like a generation has sort of moved on, hasn't it, really? The people, the Dan sisters, Corbyn, Bill Rosse Sr. and well, I mean, and have passed on now, and so do you feel like your generation, which is really, I suppose, my generation too, and the people younger, do you feel like the Western Shoshone still got that relationship, or do you feel that the US, how do you feel things stand with the Western Shoshone today?
Well, we're still alive, and there are still children, and I think that there is hope, there is a future. We need to mobilize the energy, the resources that have gone into this nuclear technology and the military industrial complex. The race should not be to get off the planet like Bezos and Elon Musk are racing to get off the planet. There's work here to save the planet. The race needs to be to protect the land, to protect the water everywhere. There's not an unlimited amount of water, and nuclear weapons testing has put radiation everywhere on this planet, everywhere. Things that were elements that never existed before are now everywhere on this planet. We need to protect what we have left, and there's plenty to protect. It's a beautiful planet. I was telling you about some of the beautiful life that we have here, rare life. Elon Musk will mine anything, I hear. He'll mine anything. And where he has his battery factory near Reno, where he has his lithium mine source near Silver Peak in Shoshone country, there are only 50,000 of one Tim's buckwheat plant on 5 acres. That's it. Nowhere else in the world. We have rare life here. Nowhere else in the world. And these are what's important. This relationship with the water, with these, the life we have here in the Great Basin, that's what's important. That's what's important to me. Other people want to make money, and they want to go live in an underground can, a bunker. They want to go to space and watch reruns of how beautiful the earth was. I'm living protecting this land. I'm living protecting Mother Earth, and that's what's important. We need to protect that water. At Tecopa, where we have our healing center, the water's been flowing for 1 million years. And my people have been here for thousands of years observing the life in that water, and it's medicine. I don't know how it works. Maybe I know something, but I'm not a medicine man. That's another person, and we know who those medicine people are. My aunt is a language coordinator and speaker, and she teaches that to other people. We develop language in relation to the land so we can explain these things to each other. But the water feeds all life, and I've had unique experiences. The neighbors out there who are other Americans, they think it's appropriate to sell the water. We just don't do that. We just don't do that. And so we're poor, but we're wealthy in other ways. The neighbor charges money and brings people into pools, and he has a hotel and he puts people in the pools. The problem is when he cleans his pool, he uses chlorine, and he takes that pool water and flushes it down to a 1 million year flow of water, killing all of the unique life. So those are the things we have to watch. Nuclear weapons testing is of a similar effect in that we see the results. I have an understanding of the land. So when the fallout goes onto the land, okay, and this is from my observation in Timbisha, which is Death Valley. Timbisha is the red ochre, iron oxidized, so it's red. And these are our medicine, and we use them in various ways. In Timbisha, I would watch the ice form under rocks that big, and the ice would form, the wind blows the rocks, and people are, how are these rocks moving down there? It's getting blown on top of the ice. That's how they move. And with that observation, it helped me understand how in our dry lake beds, in the areas downwind from nuclear weapons testing, when the fallout came, these heavy plutonium and uranium particles would get bounced across the dry lake bed, and they'd collect on the edges of the dry lake bed. And now these these rich people, I won't say wealthy, rich people who now have motorcycles and these little four-wheel off-roaders and these big campers from Las Vegas, they go out to these dry lake beds and they go play out there kicking up dust. My grandfather always told me, stop kicking up dust, because he understood that there was something in the dust. And these people will go down and kick it up. The plutonium is still there. The uranium is still there. And people need to be preventing cancer rather than curing it. Curing is important, but that's what we will do, and that's what the water is for. But we can also prevent these things by not allowing these particles to be resuspended, and people can become educated on ways to avoid that. So that is what our Nuclear Risk Management for Native Communities project did. And you'll see some of that information on our webpage, nativeCommunityActionCouncil.org. So we looked at these exposure pathways that are unique to the Shoshone people in our diet, in our food. And some of the things we learned by bringing researchers out, we took them hunting, we took them gathering, we showed them what our medicine was, we showed them how we prepared our food. We ate the entire thyroid of the rabbit, the deer, and the antelope, which were our main food sources. And nobody told us, we didn't know not to do those things. And we still eat rabbit, we still hunt deer, and we need to continue to educate our people about these things. And we would gather dead wood because our pine nuts are our staple food as well. They are in our green pine trees. And the dead pine trees are what we would use for our ceremonies, for our heating our homes, but they could potentially be dead from exposure to the radioactive fallout. And we didn't know those things. And when we burn the wood in our sweats, the smoke is a different exposure pathway. As well, in our homes, if you ever heat your house with fire, the smoke sometimes escapes into the house when you're putting more wood in, and that is a unique exposure pathway into our lungs. So we had to learn about these things, and we have to continue to educate our people, but now just not our people, other people. There are ways that we can protect ourselves. And it's just nonsense that people don't want to wear a mask. The smoke out here from the fires in the West is significant. And those masks are so helpful, but they don't want to wear a mask for COVID. Wear it to protect yourself from the dust, the smoke that is coming from the fires burning. There's a lot of other nasty stuff in the smoke. People have masks and they're refusing to wear them. That's just foolishness.
You've got I totally agree with you. Rebecca, you've got a question you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I wanted to start by thanking you so much, Ian, for coming and talking to us. And just, you really brought to mind for me when William Rosse Sr. came and gave evidence at Bow Street Court in London for the 13 of us women who had gone into Buckingham Palace to a gate crash to the Queen's garden party with information about all the British nuclear tests that were done on Western Shoshone land, to protest and try to call a halt to all the nuclear testing, but also to try to highlight for people the importance that Britain and the Queen as our sovereign, the importance of sovereignty for the Western Shoshone people, of Noah, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Nuer Segovia, the land that the Ruby Valley Treaty and your lives, as you say, thousands of years followed through. And then I also just was really struck by your talking about being water protectors, because when we were waiting for the trial of Juley, Lorna and Jane, we actually drove out to Death Valley, and we saw the ghost towns, and we went right down into the area, and we could see the desert, and we could also kind of see a relationship with water. But the passion with which you talk about being water protectors has just really opened my mind. so my question, and I think I saw that I think Lorna's got one probably quite similar coming, which is really, what can we do? We've listened to you. You've given your time to talk to us about this. We've got people attending this, mostly from the British Isles, but we have got some people from the US territory, and we've got some people from the Pacific and Australia. And I think we'd all like to know a little bit more from you. How can we help? What can we do to raise more attention and support for what you're trying to achieve with protecting the environment, protecting the water, preventing Yucca Mountain nuclear waste, and preventing the military use still on your land?
I think that it's important to understand, as I feel the law works for the Shoshone people. As I said, we made this great nation what it is. We allied ourselves with the United States to make America this great nation that it is. And it is a nation of laws. Your people as well have relationships with the United States based on law, and the law works for me. Your country comes and has tested weapons, takes part in these activities, as well as military training, red flag events at the Nellis Air Force Bombing and Gunnery Range in Shoshone country. These are violations of law, and we need to have adherence to the law. Our greatest need right now is a safe place to live. We don't have our treaty reservation, and the United States is obligated by that treaty, which emanates from international law, to protect the Shoshone people. We need that treaty reservation, and we need other nations to understand that the United States isn't being fair, that there is a law in place, and the United States needs to be doing the right thing. And these Americans need others to help them do the right thing. So awareness is key. As far as the water, one thing's not well understood, that in the desert, as I mentioned, it's an ocean to us. The proposed nuclear waste repository at Yucca Mountain, the entire mountain is saturated in the pores of the rock. This is not rock. It is welded tough, as they say. It is volcanic material. In the pores, and you'll see holes all in this, big holes. In the pores of the rock, there is pure water. It may be tainted now, but there's pure water in there, and someday it's going to come out. And that is going to be water that goes into our biosphere. And that's the big difference between the repository at Yucca Mountain and the original intent of deep geologic storage of high-level nuclear waste, that the excuse me a second. There's an animal trying to escape and making noise. The repository is in the biosphere, and that is the greatest concern. It is not deep geologic. It's not a mile underground. It's not sub-seabed disposal as intended. I learned about climate change in 1995 at Yucca Mountain. The whole area exhibits the calcite between the seams of the rock, the white calcite, which is from upwelling into the horizon, the repository horizon, and back down over hundreds of thousands of years. This correlates with the oscillation of the Earth closer to and away from the sun every 15,000 years. And our core samples, ice core samples, up to 600,000 years, show that relationship. And this is where we begin to understand climate change is human induced, because the recent change is due in large part and been understood as human caused by the amount of CO2 that is in the ice core samples now and more recently. So water is important, and that's really what we're trying to protect. We need our treaty reservation so that we can have a place where we're protected. And other nations need to know that the United States is violating the law, and we need to hold the United States accountable, whether that be at the United Nations. We've gone to the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and since 2001, we had one response from the United States stating that based on the doctrine of discovery, which is essentially the first Christian nation discovering a land of heathens and infidels, has ultimate dominion and absolute title. And this is according to the United States Supreme Court. There is no separation of church and state in America. It's just forgotten. It is baked into America. And we are fighting those things, but other Americans have no concept of this. But it's based on these concepts that the United States denies the basic human rights of the Shoshone people. And we've gone to the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and the United States has just ignored the United Nations, has not responded to requests from the United Nations to address the violation of our property rights, the dispossession and occupation of our lands, the testing of nuclear weapons, the imposition of additional threats and hazards as high-level nuclear waste. The United States has just not responded. And the only thing that they did respond, I think it was 2002, from the US Secretary of State, is that the doctrine of discovery is the basis for the US occupation and I would say religious persecution of the Shoshone people. We're being penalized for our lack of belief in Christianity. And for anybody who wants to know a little further history about Nevada, the first act was the adoption of the Common Law of England in 1861. Nevada inspired Hitler's a gas chamber, the Nevada gas chamber, when it was first developed in the just after the turn of the century, used the same methods and inspired Hitler. Other things you probably aren't aware of is that the United States, after 1946, brought, it was 1946, under the Operation Paperclip, brought Nazi leaders and other Nazi engineers to the United States, which developed the infrastructure, including the testing of bombs at the Nevada test site. These are problems within the culture of secrecy of the United States that we continue to battle. So bringing these things, having these events, getting awareness to these issues are important. That's helpful, and not letting it just lay. We continue to fight for our rights and assert our sovereignty, and we're going to continue to do that. I'm not going to let these people get away with killing my family. It is disgustingly shameful, and that is what Carrie Dan, my elders, Chief Yao, believe, and I will continue to do that work.
Well, thank you. Jane's just, I think it's Jane, just posted a link to the Native Community Action Council website. It's very easy to remember, actually, because it is Native Community Action Council, if I could even get it the right way around, .org. That's a website. I think it looks to me like it's got your hand in it. It's got lots of useful video. It's very interesting and informative. It's got lots of stuff posted on it if you want to find out about the Western Shoshone in Nevada. So I'd really recommend going to have a look at that. Has anybody else got any other questions they want to ask Ian?
Yes.
Go on then.
Thank you. I hope, I should imagine that most, well, thank you. That was really, really valuable. Thank you. I should imagine that most of us who are on this webinar are sort of people who take environmental action locally. But we are, you know, we have an enduring link with you because our government has, you know, damaged your families and damaged your land. This is a link that we share beyond the link that we share with all other people. And it was sort of fairly straightforward when, you know, Britain is dropping bombs on your land. It's fairly straightforward for us to sort of sit up and say, that shouldn't happen. We will do our best to try and halt it. And looking to, when you were talking, looking to take action now, it strikes me that two fairly simple actions that we might take, and I'm suggesting them just to see what your reaction is one that we could, as a collective thing, just make it known to the American embassy that we are aware of these things, and we continue to make it known, so that your struggles and your victories and the things that you have yet to win are not rendered invisible, so that they know that we're watching. And the other one is just amongst our fellow environmentalists and peace activists to keep on making the point that nuclear power is not without its damages, and where are we gonna put the waste? Because there is a sort of creeping acceptance amongst people who sort of say, well, this is our only saviour. And, you know, I live in West London, then, you know, there's not going to be a waste repository under Hammersmith. It's got to go somewhere, and it shouldn't go near where your families live. And so I think those two things, talking within our own communities, with our own sort of people who want to do right, and pointing out that this is one way to do right, and also making what you are going through and what you do visible between us and the United States representative in the UK.
I appreciate that. I think also awareness to options for our storage of electricity that doesn't require nuclear, that we are all downwinders, and the existential threat are these weapons of mass destruction, and we haven't seen the end of them. But the joke is that fusion is 20 years out, and I'm hearing scientists continue to say that about fusion. And the problem that I see is that these scientists and engineers never ask, should we do something? Their response is, we can do something. Mm-hmm. And they go and do these things. They never ask if they shouldn't build these things. They're always going and doing, and that's a problem. We know what we're trying to protect. As I said, they don't. They are can do no matter what, and we'd rather not and protect what we have. And I think that's important to understand, and that's an important viewpoint. I don't seek to become super wealthy. I'm trying to protect some things, and that's what my life is dedicated to. And I appreciate those of you who are dedicated 40 years in on this issue. I appreciate that. I appreciate your alliance, and I appreciate your support. So thank you.
Thank you.
Rebecca's got another question to us. We've just got a comment here from Lynn Jameson from the chat. And Lynn says, the nuclear, I totally agree with her, the nuclear lobby has enormous resources and takes every opportunity to trumpet nuclear power as a solution, commas, and so it's incredibly important to help you counter that in every way using the arguments that you have made locally. Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, we're here in a way, like has already been said, because we've got a human connection to the Western Shoshone Nation, apart from, the moral argument. And we've heard Ian speak tonight, and we, from the horse's mouth, we've heard about the effects of nuclear colonization on a native nation that's still fighting back and is still there. So that's very important. In a way, it's hard to put your finger on any direct action to take, because it's all so big and so vague in a way, isn't it? But we can retain our awareness of what's going on and communicate to other people. And Rebecca's got a question to ask about possible links with ICANN. Rebecca's more well, Rebecca's very well connected, isn't she? So Rebecca, you ask your question, please.
Yeah, it's because you mentioned the TPNW, the UN nuclear ban treaty that entered into force in January this year, and that has specific. It's got a very humanitarian preamble, but specifically Articles 6 and 7 deal with environmental remediation and assistance for communities and people who have suffered from, who are affected by, impacted by nuclear testing and nuclear use. And in fact, we're working also within ICANN, although we didn't get the word production there. The production of nuclear weapons is prohibited by the treaty, so we feel that that's also part of that. So my question was, you know, are you engaging at all with that? Obviously, the US as a state has not signed, so this is not binding on the United States directly, but it is binding on a whole lot of cities and even the state of California, who have signed up to align themselves with the treaty as part of an ICANN appeal. And the first meeting of states parties is going to take place next year in March in Vienna. And ICANN, which, as you know, is the big network that a lot of us are part of, is engaging on a lot of this, including Articles 6 and 7. So are there ways in which we could you know, work with you on that if you would like that? Do you know, for example, would you or one, you know, we would, having listened to you, having heard you, I would love to find a way to bring you to participate in the meeting of the first meeting of states parties in Vienna, to actually talk very directly about the impact, both of the nuclear testing, the militarism that still carries on, and the Yucca Mountain, which is connected in totally through the whole issue of nuclear waste and the need for environmental remediation, which you really have talked about. How can we do that? Would you like us to?
Yes, certainly. I'd like to participate. Again, the culture of secrecy here is the biggest impediment, because there's no acknowledgement of these issues. There's no acknowledgement of the damage done to the Shoshone people. There's no support to do the right thing to protect the Shoshone people. There's no monitoring. There's no following individuals. And as I said, origin is important. Now, I've traveled abroad and I have dual citizenship, okay? I have Shoshone citizenship and United States citizenship. So I can travel on both the US passport and a Shoshone passport, okay? And I've traveled abroad, you know, this is in Shoshone, signed by my chief, and we have visas, and we travel around, and other Shoshone have traveled other places. And the United States says that these are invalid. So when I wanted to come to England, they said, oh, all your passports not valid. Great Britain said that. And the thing to understand is that this passport, which I've used and traveled other places, other countries, is made in the USA. It is valid in the United States of America, and it should be valid every other country in the world. That's an important thing. And I would love to travel on a Shoshone passport. So I would need to get visas and make those arguments, but I could travel on a US passport as well. And I think it's important. Yeah, we're willing to come, myself, Joe Kennedy, there are other Shoshone as well, but yes.
So I'd like to follow up with you then by email, and we'll try and make this happen. It would be really, really great.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, and on the subject of passports, Lynn again has just chipped in. I think that Lynn sounds like she's in Scotland. In fact, she says we can ask our Scottish government that they accept Shoshone passports when we become an independent nation. Well, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? If we could, maybe it's the English who won't accept them. We could, the other devolved governments could. We've got the UK is made up of, I'm sure you know, Ian, 4 nations: the English, the Welsh, the Scottish, and the Irish. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting concept, isn't it? Does anybody else want to ask any more questions? Because we're coming up to the end of the meeting. I can't see any little messages appearing. Look, I found that very informative, and it's very, very clear, isn't it? The links between nuclear colonialism, and when we say nuclear, we mean both waste, the waste from the energy itself, the mining, everything's involved, and and Ian has spoken very eloquently and very interestingly about the connections and why the Western Shoshone particularly at risk from nuclear fallout. But he's absolutely right. I don't think anybody has disagreed that we're all downwinders and that the nuclear era affects us all in our lives today, whether we know it or not. And that was a really useful tip. Don't make dust. I particularly won't make dust if I'm ever in the Southwest US again. That's for sure. I'll be treading very, very carefully on Mother Earth.
There's one other thing I want to suggest. So one of the ideas I had for mapping fallout is that because the radiation is everywhere from the period of weapons testing, in Fukushima, they have the radiation monitoring program, which is a SafeCast, okay? And it's a individual citizen-based initiative. I had an idea for collaborating with a university somewhere, taking samples, core samples out of trees. So creating a grid across the North America continent or the world, I guess, and doing core samples every mile or kilometer or so, and sending that to a lab, getting the sample and building maps from the trees, from the life that would hold some of these long-lived radionuclides. So I just want to suggest that we're looking for collaborators. I want to do more research. I'd rather do that. It's studying the land. It's understanding the land, things that are important to me. You know, making money, just not my thing.
Well, that's just as well, isn't it? Given the path you've chosen, yeah. Well, that's interesting as well. So if anybody's got any ideas, get in touch with us. I think you've got our contact details. Just thank you very much, Ian. Thanks very much. We really appreciate you speaking this evening, well, our evening and your afternoon. So thanks very much, and we'll stay in touch, and there'll be opportunities to sort of build on this meeting and do something useful to support you, but to make the world a safer and better place in general then. Yes. So I'm going to say goodbye, and I don't think I've got the power to close the meeting, but
yeah, I just before we do it, I also want to add my thanks to you, Ian, because it's been really fascinating. I thought I knew quite a bit about this, but you've taught me so much more that I didn't know. And I also wanted to thank all of the guests, panelists, and we will take this up and see if we can take this forward for you to come and join us in Vienna, give testimony in some form. We're not sure how it'll work out, but I'll email you directly and we'll try and take that forward. But other than that, I just want to thank absolutely everyone. And then Ian, if you have just a few last words or something that you would like to say before I close the meeting.
I am water, and that's what I want everyone else to take away from this. Pure water is important. That's what my people are, and that is our identity. And I hope other people would embrace that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.